So how do we begin writing CSS for these pages? There's lots of theory about how to approach and structure CSS for a project. A good rule of thumb is to start with the small and common things and work your way up to the bigger, more specific things. We could start at the top with the header, but doing each part of the page in turn doesn't make too much sense when you have design consistencies. The font, for instance, is the same throughout the website. So we could write it for the header and then also for the main part and the footer and all the elements in between. So instead of doing that, let's start by writing some font styles for the whole page. There are two fonts in the design, Merriweather and Hebo. Both can be found on Google Fonts. So let's use that to include them in our website. I'm going to take this link and I'm going to add it into my HTML before my other CSS. Making sure I put it into both of my HTML pages. As we are working with just one CSS file, it's a good idea to make a note of what is where at the top in a comment, a bit like a contents. This keeps things ordered, and it means that we can find things later. The first thing that we're going to do is fonts and typography. So I'm going to add that into my contents. And then for each section, I'll write before it which part it is. Now that we have the fonts loaded in our HTML, let's use them. Because the sans serif font, the Hebo font, is more commonly used in the design, let's put that on the body element, as it will affect most elements inside it and is a quick win. Let's change the background color to grey and the font color to dark grey, just like the design. Now let's think about our basic HTML text elements, like our paragraphs and our headings, our H1s, our H2s, etc., and set up some font styling for these. All the headers are the serif font, Merriweather. So let's change our headers to use that. Remember our comma, which is and each element? The font sizes are different, however. The H1 is bigger than the H2, which is bigger than the H3. Now, a word about sizing. We don't know what any of the sizes are in this design. We just have an image. The designer might provide you with some. You could use a piece of graphic software like Photoshop or Sketch to measure all the sizes, and this will give you a really good idea. However, software will measure in pixels, and we, as developers, probably don't want to use pixels as they are absolute and will be the same everywhere, regardless of the screen size. What you can do is see how big things are compared to the rest of the design. The first H2 on the article page is about the size of the two sentences below it. So let's give it a font size of 2 rem and we can tweak it from there. The H1 on this page is actually the same size, even though in our design it's got a colour of white. This is specific though, so we'll look at this later. we'll just make the H1 and H2 2 rem. The H3 and the H4 are just a little bit smaller. I'm using rem units here. We can change them if they need tweaking later. The paragraphs have got some space underneath them and some more space in between the lines. I'm using rem units for the margins here. So if the font size changes, the margins will stay in ratio to the site-wide font size. It's something we call vertical rhythm, which is important in typography and thus web design. Let's also add a margin to our headers. That's a pretty good start. We've affected both of our pages. But as you can see, our H1 in the header is also affected by our margins. And as you can see in our design, it's a lot smaller, and the gaps are a lot smaller as well. We just need to find a way to style just that H1. But before we go on and look at the header specifically, let's pick out some other parts of the design which are the same throughout and style those. This will make the header and everything else easier when we come to style it. This is a really good approach to writing CSS.